Welcome to Spotlight ETSU. I'm your host, Carrie Oliveira. Both of our guests today are from the Department of Communication. Dr. Wesley Buerkle is an associate professor in the Division of Communication Studies, and Kara Harker is an associate professor in the Division of Theater and Dance. First, we're going to talk to Dr. Buerkle. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you do?
I am an associate professor in the Department of Communication at East Tennessee State University.
What exactly does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, I was brought here in 2005, which means I've been here.
Like by aliens, you say that?
But yes, well, it felt like, no. I interviewed for a job here. It's as a professor, it's a national search, and so I was one of the final two candidates, and I came and interviewed and secured the position.
And that was in what year, 2005?
Yeah, I started here in the fall of 2005. And I was asked to teach and develop courses in rhetoric.
If you had to summarize what rhetoric is, which you knew I was going to ask you, what would you say?
It is the study of public messages, right? In communication, we study messages.
Yes.
You are an expert in interpersonal communication,
Indeed.
the back and forth between people and those dynamics. I'm very much interested in public messages, whether it be television, speech, film, book even.
Is television and film sort of the traditional medium in which to look at rhetoric, or is it like speeches typically?
But traditional, historically, it's speeches, and we now often call that public address. So it's rhetoric and public address.
Right.
And I have a background. My training is in public address. My dissertation was a public address sort of dissertation when I got my PhD. But in rhetoric, people also many times now talk about media, and we look at the images in media and really the choices people make. Not so much about the choice itself, but about what does it tell us about ourselves, about society? What are these arguments presented to us?
So that's sort of the supposition underneath the study of rhetoric, is that we're learning something about our own culture by way of what's presented in the media, or what's presented for public consumption.
Yes, and thank you for doing that better than I did.
I have a good way to synthesize. So what subject matter are you particularly interested in as you study rhetoric?
Gender and sexuality really have been the things I've most consistently looked at, have been issues of gender and sexuality, often in the media, but not exclusively.
So representations of gender and sexuality and...
That's right. And
okay.
My dissertation, for instance, I looked at Margaret Sanger and birth control rhetoric, and about that specifically I was looking at the way that her arguments for birth control, how did they depict women? How are women sort of created and constructed and depicted in these arguments for birth control?
What I love about that is it's not just about it's not just what she's saying about birth control, but what do we infer about women in that place? And so what are the cultural representations of women in conversations that were all terrible?
Ultimately, that a good argument for women having birth control that it's not about women is sort of what this history unfortunately tells us. Margaret Sanger begins about 1912, 1914, making arguments that birth control will liberate women. It'll liberate them personally and sexually. You'll now enjoy sex. And you'd be surprised to know that those arguments were not the winning arguments. She became...
shocking.
Yes, shocking. A lot more change really in the courts. A judge had once said that she sought to turn every home into a brothel. But her arguments became much more effective when she began saying contraception allows women to be better mothers. By limiting the number of children in the household, she better cares for them, the children are not so sickly, the husband's wages go further. She's a better mother, she's a better wife, she's a better mother for the nation.
So from that, we draw the fact that only is it persuasive to talk about making birth control accessible if it is the case that it's good for the family unit and keeping women in a very traditional sort of.
So what can this woman do for you is really sort of the model. And that's just it gets worse from there, because then it became that how important it was that women not control their bodies, but women's bodies be controlled. When we get the eugenics movement in the 1920s and concerns about overpopulation. That was when, in this country, a number of states actually had laws on the books that said you could forcibly sterilize a person. And in fact, the Supreme Court upheld a case in Virginia, Buck v. Bell, saying it was in the state's interest to sterilize women they thought were unfit to reproduce.
The state of Virginia.
Not the only state. One
of our little neighbors said it was perfectly fine to forcibly sterilize women if she was unfit.
It was in the name of societal benefit.
What were the criteria for determining fitness?
There was no good criteria,
as
it will surprise probably nobody. There was really no good criteria. She was deemed to be feeble-minded, and this is a real catch-all term starting in the 19-teens, being feeble-minded. There's no clear criteria for it.
That's wonderful.
There's really not. And so if you thought a person was feeble-minded, you could determine they were feeble-minded. And if you thought a person wasn't feeble-minded, you could very clearly prove that they were not feeble-minded.
So very circular.
Is very sort of, what would you like to find? We can find that for you. Yeah.
That's outstanding.
And so again, these arguments about birth control move from the less successful, this is how good this is for women for themselves, to women doing this for their family, and women sort of as objects to be used for the benefit of the state.
That is fabulous and disturbing. And would you argue that rhetoric really is the only sort of like academic domain in which that kind of cultural representation is being examined? In this way, maybe? Like,
I hate to make that statement because
sure, I mean, it's
there are
broad,
people who, I mean, as somebody who does largely what my work now concentrates on men and masculinity.
Right, which we're going to talk about here momentarily.
Right, and a lot of that comes out of sociology, some of it in English and film studies. So we all sort of bring our own theoretical perspectives and backgrounds. So I'm much more interested in the theory of the simple choices, whether it's language or otherwise.
This is what particularly defines it to the domain of communication.
Right.
That we're looking at messages and symbols and representations of things. So lately, you've been studying masculinity, representations of masculinity specifically.
That's right.
But your choices of what you've been looking at, and I only catch this like talking to you in the office mostly. We've never actually, I don't think, had an actual conversation.
No, but I'm so glad RTVF has brought us together.
Indeed, that's lovely, and we work like 2 doors down from one another. But you've been looking at like very sort of movies where there's very particular representations of men. Yeah. And so you've been looking at things like The Hangover.
Right, The Hangover, I Love You Man, Cedar Rapids.
I don't know what Cedar Rapids is. Who's in that?
It wasn't as big. It was he was in The Hangover. He's the dentist in The Hangover, and I can't think of it. Ed Helms. Ed Helms is in it. Sigourney Weaver's in it. Also, I'm bad with names today. The co-star from Ricky Bobby, the Talladega Nights.
John C. Reilly?
John C. Reilly's in there. Some other folks. But so I'm looking at these films, and really what I'm looking at has been comedies.
Okay.
I'm really focusing on comedies rather than, say, action movies, because I think that the comedies, the men are closer to life. I'm not saying that they're imitations or clear depictions of life.
Right.
But the Sylvester Stallone or Vin Diesel or whoever it is.
I've never met a guy like, Vin Diesel in real life, but surely I have met a bunch of men who are sort of like Paul Rudd in any movie.
Paul Rudd or Jonah Hill or Jason
Exactly.
Segel or lots of these sorts of guys. And that's
so more familiar to the audience. So would you contend that that has a bigger impact on the way that men, so the extent to which men see themselves in the movies, or the way they relate to them, or the way they enjoy them?
Well, I'm a humanist, I'm not a social scientist.
Right.
And so I do, well, no, and so that's why so that's a fair question. I get asked that a lot of times, but I do less than an impact.
Okay.
I'm not looking so much at impact because that's more of a quantitative, talking to audiences.
Media effects kind of a thing.
Right, and much more of media effects. I'm interested in, as I look at this message, what is it suggesting to us?
Okay.
And what is it, if it is holding up a mirror to society, however much media does or doesn't do that, what are we getting from that?
And what are we getting from that?
Well, one of them is what I call the boredom of privilege.
Boredom of privilege.
Yeah, the boredom of privilege, because you look at these movies, The Hangover is a really nice example of it, that Ed Helms, his character, is the center of these movies.
Right.
And because you think about when you study literature in the 7th grade, they teach you about conflict. There's man versus self, and there's man versus nature, and man versus man. And you think, well, so what's the driving conflict here? And really the great problem he has, other than they get themselves into a lot of trouble, but the problem he really has is that his life just isn't very exciting. Right? This is the reoccurring theme, is that his life just isn't very exciting. Here he is, he's a dentist, he has a sort of good upper middle class job, he's white, he's straight, seems maybe sort of a Protestant background, able-bodied. I mean, this is so much privilege. It's just kind of boring for the poor guy.
I'm just over it already.
Right? Yeah, because what do I really have going for me? This is part of the.
What else is there to get?
What else is there to get? And so you also have some of these other movies, maybe the movie like Knocked Up,
Yes.
where you have Seth Rogen. And it's also the case of what I call help me to help me. Right? It's not that you're going to pour energy into me that I can really then be there. No, you just got to pour a lot of energy into me, help me mature. And these sort of this slackerdom, right?
Yes.
We don't question that. Lots of films, these men are just sort of lost and trying to find themselves, but they're always these white, seemingly, even when they're sort of broke, very middle class.
Yes.
And so they don't really have any problem other than they just quite haven't gotten their act together, but that seems to be enough to hang a movie around.
So if you were going to put it in literary terms, the conflict is between man and his own boredom.
Right.
And his own privilege.
Yeah, and just that he just doesn't seem like there's much to it anymore, which is sort of funny. It's much like how muscular Christianity developed in the 19th century, or the Boy Scouts, or the YMCA, was that men were going to be sissified by the Industrial Revolution,
right.
So we need to make buckskin men out of them as part of it. Yeah.
That's important, right? Sort of like preserve this masculine presentation of men. And so we have guys in conflict with their own boredom.
That's, I think, a big part of it. And so
I think that's such an I never really thought about that. And I've seen most of those movies, and I'm like, And I think I have been frustrated by the plot lines. I'm like, why are they even in this situation?
Right.
How does this even happen? Because it doesn't.
It's such a non-conflict.
Yes.
Right? The problem is you just sort of don't feel like getting a job. Well, join the club, and I mean, I'm not saying unemployment's not a real issue.
Right,
but,
no, exactly.
But
I mean,
as it's shown for them, it's always this, well, once they want a job, they can go and get one. And
Yes.
I think, right, no, the white middle class guy usually doesn't have a real hard time getting a job in many of these sort of films anyway. Yeah, but what's interesting are sort of the foils to these characters. You find that people of color, and not just women, but many times what I call dangerous women, are the foil to them. Dangerous women are women with lower back tattoos, women who do drugs, women who have sex just for the thrill of it.
Oh my goodness, how scandalous.
Or people of color are often then used to sort of add variety and spice to this mundane, if you will, vanilla life.
I am thinking of Steve Carell, the 40-year-old virgin.
Yes, that's another fine example.
Right, so Steve Carell has, I mean, that's highlighted, I think, more clearly than in some of the movies you talk about. Like, I'm bored, I have this like very routinized, mundane life. I'm gonna go, and these guys at work are gonna try and get me to have sex.
Yeah. Or John Cusack in Hot Tub Time Machine.
That movie doesn't make any sense to me, but you're right.
But again, and also what's interesting about that one, because this is a time travel, right? When we get time travel,
I can't even deal.
Time travel is always fun because it allows us to live out two scenarios of the present day.
I don't love that.
And we get that in Back to the Future.
I know, I don't love that either.
But we get to
Why do we like that? Why do audiences enjoy that kind of thing?
Because we say, oh, I'm looking at my life and I'm seeing how it's disappointing me today. I'm looking in the mirror, I'm disappointed by it, and now I get this sort of do-over. I get to go back. I get to decide where was that moment that if I had just gone differently, or I could have changed, I could have made it all so much different, so much better.
Right.
And so now it's to live the life I really wanted as opposed to this life, and I just sort of got stuck with it as though somebody handed it to me or whatever. And so like Hot Tub Time Machine, that scenario of the men all sort of lost, feeling emasculated because I come home and she's gone and cleaned out all of my stuff, right, except for my beer or whatever it was, or the guy who decides he's going to kill himself just something he has nothing to live for anymore, or the man who's emasculated because we see him working in a dog boutique, taking care of small dogs.
Yes.
I say as an owner and lover of small dogs.
Small dogs.
And having taken his wife's last name at her insistence, a sort of sign of emasculation. But then we get to relive a new reality after they've discovered rekindled their machismo. I don't know what it is.
Right.
Right. They're much happier and satisfied because now they've
as I was going to ask is really sort of the theme of all of this is that boredom emasculates men. Like we sit around doing nothing as opposed to like asserting. Like I'm a man, but like men, like asserting their masculinity in more traditional ways. They're just sitting around, and this like lovely middle class life doesn't require them to.
Yeah, it's sort of some sort of sissified funk is sort of the argument here, and so get out of it and be a man already. And
That's delightful. You're trying to write a book about all this sort of stuff?
I am trying, maybe the upper word there, but yes, I am.
You're in the process of
I'm in the process
stages.
of constructing this book and writing.
My understanding is that writing a book is an incredibly difficult endeavor.
I think it's probably, so far I would say I think so.
I would probably agree with that.
I think so, but doing something about doing rhetoric is that, and I always tell my advisees this, my graduate students, so once you get into analysis, it's just going to, once you really get into it, because you've studied these things, you've gotten into them, analysis is great fun because you start making those connections. You spend this time, because it's not just about rhetoric, it's not just, what does this text say to me? I'm going to let the words wash over me, and it's sort of interpretation, I'm going to draw my feelings. It's nothing like that. You've done all this background and the reading and the thinking, and you really get into them, and really, and studying them so closely, you have these connections with them, and it's great fun getting into it.
Engaging
engaging it, and also feeling sort of the importance of it, recognizing, my gosh, these are sort of serious things.
Exactly.
These messages about women, you have to sort of put up with these guys in their wandering, and it's your job to help them mature.
We can learn more about these in your classes in gender communication, rhetoric, public address, rhetorical criticism, all of that stuff. We're looking forward to your book. It has been delightful to have you on with us.
Great fun here.
We are going to take a little break, and when we come back to Spotlight ETSU, our next guest will be Kara Harker. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you very
much.
In the small town of Elmira, New York, a boy was born into an all-American family. The odds of him opening his own clothing store at the age of 18? 1 in 138,000. Excited to be a part of pop culture, he packed for the big city. The odds of finding someone to invest in his vision? 1 in 4.5 million. The odds of him achieving his dream in the fashion industry? 1 in 23 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 88. I am Tommy Hilfiger, and my family is affected by autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference.